Welcome to In Our Nature, Saint John, where city streets meet salt marshes. Saint John New Brunswick ecosystems tell a story of resilience. Join us as we explore how nature and people coexist. The Saint John Naturalists Club can be found under Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Nature Saint John. Come study, conserve, educate, and enjoy nature together with us on the east coast of Canada. Donations are accepted at the Canada Helps website. As an avid birder, Paul Mansz is a well-known figure in the New Brunswick naturalist community, and he frequently leads birding excursions and workshops. Paul has also contributed a bird sighting photos to databases like eBird and the Macaulay Library. Paul typically leads events for the Saint John Naturalist Club for its members, such as the annual Deer Island birding trips and duck identification workshops to promote nature education. However, one small bird has captured Paul's heart, the hummingbird. So, Paul is here today with us to talk about our migratory friends just in time for the spring thaw and their return to the Saint John area.
Thank you, Kate.
Which bird species are most commonly seen in New Brunswick or around the Saint John area?
In terms of hummingbirds, we only get one, the ruby-throated hummingbird that probably most people are familiar with. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's got a garden or likes birds probably has at some point in the past put up a hummingbird feeder or seen hummingbirds in their yard. They're quite common in the summer here. So anybody who enjoys birds like I do, or maybe doesn't have to enjoy birds as much as I do, just liking nature and the things that are in the surroundings have likely come across the ruby-throated hummingbird.
And I'm guessing you identify it because it has a ruby red, like a throat?
Very, very, very bright ruby red. Thing about hummingbirds that not unique to hummingbirds, but their colors, in particular the red gorget of the male hummingbird, comes from iridescence. It's not an intrinsic color. So sometimes a hummingbird in the wrong light just looks dark, almost black, but then it just turns its head and catches the sun in just the right way and turns this gorgeous ruby.
So the females are not the same color?
They are not.
Oh.
They are not. They don't have that same kind of iridescence. They're green. They're kind of a bright, brilliant green in their back, and same as the males. But no, they lack that ruby red.
I guess that's the mating attraction. Is it? Is it like the deeper the color is more attractive, or we don't really know how that's significant?
I probably should say we don't really know, other than there are very few birds where the male isn't the one who's got the more attractive coloration, what we call sexual dimorphism. And a belted kingfisher might be a good example of one that's different. The female actually has that rich chestnut chest that the male lacks. So it actually has a bit of an edge on the male.
There's some anomalies. Yeah. Are there any other rare or accidental hummingbird visitors to the province that makes those sightings special?
There have been a few. The rufous hummingbird, which is a bird of the West, has made an appearance here occasionally. The Bird Records Committee would say they're an occasional wanderer to the province. That's the most likely other hummingbird species that we'll see outside of the ruby-throated.
How would we identify them? Like, how do they look different?
Well, a rufous hummingbird, true to its name, is a very browny red, maroonish almost coloration in its body. A very rufusy gorget. The throat color it's very different from the ruby, even though it's still that kind of rufous red, but the rest of the body is a rufusy green coloration. If you were to see one, you would say, oh, this is clearly a different hummingbird. There is another hummingbird that's been reported in New Brunswick once before, the black-chinned hummingbird.
Let me guess, it has a black chin.
And it is. It's very, very closely related to the ruby-throated hummingbird. Ruby throats we tend to think of as the hummingbird east of the Mississippi. Here in eastern North America, we really only have the one hummingbird species, and that's the ruby-throated hummingbird. West of the Mississippi, and certainly the southwestern U.S., up into BC, there are a few more hummingbird species, but we don't see them. So if you were to see a black-chinned, it would be you'd have to look really closely
Right.
to make that distinction, because as I said, half the time when you're looking at a hummingbird, it's in the dark and it's just a dark chin.
And why would they, fly out of their migratory path east of the Mississippi? Like, would it be wind, or would it be, what would force them to come this way if this is not really their natural flight pattern?
There are a couple of things that drive not just hummingbirds, but birds in general to vagrancy. Some of it is, as you mentioned, storms. Here in the East Coast, the hurricane effect. A hurricane comes up the East Coast. We often get a lot of birds that are pushed or pulled along in the wake of the hurricane. But just generally, weather patterns and whatnot can push birds out of their normal territories. Mm-hmm. The other thing is something we call post-breeding dispersal. Once the birds have bred, they often range beyond what their breeding territories are. And youngsters in particular, might get lost. So in the fall, when hummingbird ruby-throats in particular migrate, it's usually the males that leave first, in the late summer, and then the females, and it's the youngsters who leave last. And it's the youngsters who you're probably seeing at your hummingbird feeders, later in September, maybe even lingering in October. But that's also the time you want to start looking for the vagrants, because it's probably the youngsters of the other species that are also getting lost.
I see.
And that's when you want to start looking at all of the hummingbirds coming to your feeders is, in that late September, October timeframe, because there may be a chance that it could be one of these unusual species.
It's interesting that the youngsters don't fly with the older hummingbirds, as sort of like showing them the path or the way, and yet still these youngsters who leave later in the year or later in their season, I suppose, are still making it to their destination of where they're supposed to be going, to the south, right? It's like an inherent thing in their brain.
No, and it's a really good point. Migration, at least amongst hummingbirds, and I can only say this as far as the theory takes us, it's not a learned behavior. So it's not the youngsters following the lead of their parents.
Right.
It's something that's instinctual. Perhaps the youngsters need a bit more of a nudge to get going with that migration. The cooler nights, shorter days, fewer sources of food, whatever it might be. Those things can all trigger migration, and it may take the youngsters a little bit longer just to figure that out.
Right.
Hey, hang on a second. My instincts are pushing me south, and now I'm also finding that, it's harder to get food. The nights are colder, whatever it might be that drives me south.
And how far do hummingbirds travel during migration, and what routes sort of bring them through or near Saint John?
It's a good question. The ruby-throated hummingbird, it ranges all the way from the Gulf Coast up to, northern Ontario, anything, as I mentioned earlier, kind of east of the Mississippi, but that would be kind of the northernmost range. We're getting pretty close to the northernmost range of hummingbirds, the Gaspé and whatnot, south shores of Quebec. But generally, once the southward migration urge hits, they tend to just flow south. There isn't so much a coastal effect where, every bird that, is going south hits the coast, like our hawks in the fall, for example. Mm-hmm. They're just gonna go south. And then once they hit the Gulf Coast, Gulf of Mexico, it's a 500-kilometer jump from there to Mexico and Central America, where they spend their winters. So all told, probably a few thousand kilometers, on average, that they're traveling south.
Yeah.
And boosting their energy reserves just when they hit the Gulf. They need generally to have twice the weight they would normally have, just to have the energy reserves to cross the Gulf, because they do it in one shot.
Do they land in water?
No.
No. So it's one straight flight?
It's one straight flight.
Okay, that's really interesting.
I remember as a kid, I don't remember where I saw this, but it was pictures of swans and geese carrying little hummingbirds on their backs, and supposedly that was a folktale, back in the day, that's how they managed to do this significant migration. But no, they do it all on their own.
So I was once in Mindo in Ecuador. Would the red-throated go that far south, or?
Probably not. Most of the ruby-throat's wintering territory is in Central America and Mexico. So, as far south as Panama. Mm-hmm. It's not to say that they might not be found further south. Generally, and you mentioned Ecuador. I mean, Ecuador is a hummingbird haven. There are
so many.
I'll say hundreds. I mean, there's 360 some species of hummingbirds, and you'd easily find 50 or 60 probably just in one birding outing, one birding excursion, of a few days in Ecuador. Yeah. There's so many down there, but it does make for confusion. If you're birding in Mexico, or as I was, a week ago on a resort, I'm looking for some of the local Mexican specialties, but I also have to be careful not to confuse them with the ruby throats that are also wintering there.
Whereas here, you typically, if you see a hummingbird, that's what it is.
You can pretty much by default, yeah, that's a ruby throat.
Guessing it.
It's not a wedge-tailed saber.
Going back to migration, how do hummingbirds manage their enormous energy demands for like their long distance travel?
Hummingbirds are extraordinarily efficient, have extraordinarily efficient metabolisms. Their metabolisms are amongst the most efficient of any vertebrate. Heart rates up the 90s to 200s to 1200s, significantly high heart rates, but they can also reduce them significantly too. Hummingbirds, amongst birds anyways, have the most the torpor that they can get into at cold weather, kind of turning down their metabolism. So the range and variation they have from very low metabolic needs through to the high metabolic needs when they're flying, they have extremely efficient metabolisms. Their brain function. Some research that was done some time ago around neural density in birds' brains, and in hummingbirds' brains in particular, they have extremely dense neurons, and that deficiency helps them when they're flying. Their cognitive abilities, all these kinds of things, just make them better at being able to take the energy intake that they get from all, the nectar and insects and whatnot they eat, and just being able to pack that into their reserves so they can make these long flights.
Now, I have heard a rumor that they can actually put themselves almost into a state of paralysis.
Yeah, we would call it torpor, but
okay.
if you find that they're just sitting on a branch, perhaps early morning, and they're just totally unresponsive, and that's all they're doing. They're in this state of torpor. Their heart rates are so significantly reduced. Their body temperature is down. There's a species of hummingbird down in the Andes. It's a cold weather, kind of in the evenings, it gets very cold, and its body temperature approaches 3-4 degrees C. So you're looking at a bird that is able to manage, warm-blooded species that is able to manage its...
Especially considering its size.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of room for reserves.
Exactly.
It's so tiny. Do they have any predators? Or are there if so, how do they protect themselves? Or do they have any natural built-in ability to flee from attackers? And do other birds eat hummingbirds?
Yes, and yes.
Okay. I know that's a lot of questions.
Yeah. It's interesting about predators. Likely the most significant predator that hummingbirds are going to face are cats. They are probably the number one source of predation that hummingbirds face. I was reading an article not too long ago about other sources of predation. I'm thinking this may not be the case in New Brunswick. Could be the case in New Brunswick, but praying mantises, the Chinese mantis, that is an introduced species, and particularly in garden centers like Ontario, Quebec, down through the U.S. You can get mantises to help your garden deal with pest control and whatnot. And these are big insects, and they are known to take hummingbirds.
Really?
Which is this one article out of Georgia. University of Georgia indicated that the Chinese mantis may be the second predatory threat behind cats to hummingbirds. But certainly there are other sources of predation that you'll find around here. Hummingbirds kind of tiny, so come up on the radar of a hawk is unlikely. But some of the smaller accipiters, sharpshin, kestrel, they're all it's all within the realm of the possible strikes.
You would think, the way they fly with so many beats per minute, that they would be faster.
They're as anybody's seen, their ability to change course, to reverse, even fly upside down, in cases is a skill that doesn't, or a capability rather, that doesn't exist in any other bird. So they have that leg up. Yeah. In theory, it seems they would have that leg up. But as evolution being what it is, I'm sure there's some predators out there that have evolved, an ability to adapt accordingly.
You did mention something about bird feeders, so I just want to go back to what can the residents of Saint John do to attract hummingbirds to their gardens?
Having a garden, number one, probably the biggest thing.
Something that a deer won't eat.
Okay, well now I'm not sure that there is an answer to that one then. Hummingbirds generally, certainly the ruby throat, are attracted to red, orange, that kind of coloration. Okay. Just in principle, hummingbirds don't really have a sense of smell, but they have good visual acuity. And they see those colors well and are attracted to those colors. So if you have, red or orange flowers, native flowers would be like cardinal flower, honeysuckle, the bush honeysuckle, things like that. All of the cane flowers, raspberries, blackberries, those all naturally attract hummingbirds. So, without a feeder, you're still going to get hummingbirds in your yard. We have a lot of cultivated plants in our garden, hostas and whatnot in particular. And the hummingbirds love the hostas. I see them at the hostas all the time. Just having a garden is probably your first step. If you don't have, enough space for a garden, maybe you're an apartment dweller, you've got a balcony.
Or you don't have a fenced-in garden.
Or you don't have a fenced-in garden and the deer enjoy your buffet. A bird feeder absolutely is going to attract hummingbirds, and there are so many different kinds of hummingbird feeders you can buy out there almost any place.
Now, my problem with hummingbird feeders is I keep reading online that there's certain things you should do and certain things you shouldn't do, and that you should clean them often because hummingbirds are susceptible to mold and that will kill them. And so, what's the best practice concerning hummingbird feeders?
It's almost like any bird feeding initiative somebody takes, there's a responsibility that comes with that, and sometimes it seems onerous. But yeah, hummingbird food that you're putting in a feeder is basically sugar water, and then I would say 1 part sugar to 4 parts water is all you need. You don't need to go buy and pay money for specialized hummingbird food. You don't need to have anything that's got red in it. Just straight water with sugar is all you need. Ideally, you boil it. Boil the water. That's going to make it a lot easier to dissolve the sugar in it.
Right.
Put it in the hummingbird feeder. If it's cold or cool, May, September, October, you probably don't have to change it every day. Really, you just need to kind of keep your eye on the water's cloudiness. If the water gets cloudy, then absolutely you got to change it. Changing it every day is a routine that isn't a bad habit to get into, in particular in the summer, because the water will, over time...
stagnate?
It's not so much stagnating, but, sugar ferments. There's all sorts of things that can happen. Just the exposure to the air brings, pollens, molds, all sorts of things in contact with the water, and the water becomes a breeding ground for that. So, it's not that hummingbirds aren't going to encounter that in the wild as well, but they're used to the things in the wild. So you want to take care with your hummingbird feeders and make sure they're nice and clean.
Is there a time of year that you should stop putting them out, during migration? Will it ever stop a bird from migrating if there's food around, or is that not a concern?
It's going to be a matter of opinion, frankly. Okay. I don't know that the science has shown that hummingbird feeders keep the hummingbirds around. The hummingbirds leave when the hummingbirds leave. It's instinctual. So
it's probably the cold weather.
And the shortened days. I mean, there are a lot of theories around what triggers a hummingbird to migrate. Certainly the number of hummingbird feeders and related flowers that are out there. If that was the only thing keeping hummingbirds here, you'd still have hummingbirds well into September and October, and you don't.
Right.
So I don't think that fear is well founded. Personally, we leave our hummingbird feeders up probably into early November, just on the off chance that there might be a stray. And for most of the month, from early October to November, we got nothing. So It's not that we're keeping any hummingbirds here, but it is there just in case.
Okay. And just turning our heads a little bit to conservation and research, how is climate change affecting hummingbird migration in the breeding areas in Atlantic Canada, or is it?
Well, it's interesting. Hummingbirds, ruby-throated hummingbirds anyways, are a species that's likely increasing in population. Some of the population studies that you may read about, certainly from, the late 90s through to, the mid-2010s, if you find data, would suggest that hummingbirds certainly remain a species of least concern, the population growing.
Right.
And that's simply because a lot of the cultivation that we do actually is, outside of monocultures, is amenable to hummingbirds. So whether or not we're simply seeing more because we've got more people looking for them, but generally the threats to hummingbirds don't really seem to be impacting, the population like they are other neotropical migrants. I would think that climate change's biggest effect is going to be range expansion. You'll see hummingbirds occurring, further north into Quebec, Newfoundland, Labrador, Northern Ontario. It used to be that hummingbirds, I come from Ontario, and, the hummingbird breeding territory was Southern Ontario, Southwestern Ontario. Now it extends well into Northern Ontario, across Lake Superior into Manitoba. So the breeding range of hummingbirds likely is expanding as
I
climate
think
change.
the climate change last summer anyway here just really made things dry. We didn't have rain for almost 2.5 months, if I'm correct.
That's true. And if that were a consistent pattern, as it may well become, that's going to change the vegetative, complexion of what we have here, which may or may not affect what hummingbirds see. It's certainly going to affect what other birds see. That's going to have a detrimental effect on a lot of other neotropical.
Well, our trees deciduated much earlier than normal as well.
Yeah. Obviously, in the spring, everybody likes to see where the hummingbirds are, and there are hummingbird migration sites that you can look up. eBird, it's one that I always fall back on. It's always easy to find from eBird where have all the sightings been over the last month. And you kind of see the progression up the eastern seaboard. I think their true benefit is simply in awareness, just making people aware of what lives with us. Often you go out and you may not be paying attention to nature. Yeah. And if it helps us pay a little bit more attention to nature, then I think that's ultimately the best.
Well, the Saint John Naturalist Club's certainly done that for me. I've learned so much about the world around me and just being more conscious when I go for a walk of, that's a whatever kind of bird, or that's this kind of tree, and this is what its role plays, and the nature of things is fascinating.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are you able to share a quick fact about hummingbirds? Any quick fun facts that come to mind?
Fun facts. Okay. I don't know where to start. There's so many fun facts about hummingbirds. I think everybody realizes that hummingbirds, are the only birds that can fly the way they do. It's not that there aren't birds out there that can hover. Lots of birds hover. Right. But there aren't any birds that are going to be able to fly backwards or upside down or do kind of
straight
the sideway. So hummingbirds are unique in that regard. The hummingbirds have so much variability. There's the tiny bee hummingbird, the smallest bird in the world, of Cuba.
How small is it?
In terms of their weight, they weigh less than a dime. And then there's something called a giant hummingbird, the Indian, northern and southern Indian giant hummingbirds that I was reading about recently because they split. It used to just be one species, but now they've split them.
I can imagine what a giant hummingbird, like how big is a giant hummingbird?
It's big. It's got an 8 to 9 inch wingspan. 22, I should stick to my metric here, 22 centimeter wingspan. So it's big. And I've seen them, and they are big. It looks like, it's not a robin in size, but it looks like big, and it's flapping, really fast. And, it's got not the blur of wings that a ruby-throat is, but...
can it fly backwards too?
It can. It can do everything a hummingbird can do.
Really?
And the one thing that they've discovered recently, its migration is anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 kilometers. So it's actually almost flying twice what our ruby-throat does. But it's going from, Patagonia up north into Peru, Ecuador, and is also doing the altitudinal migration as well, from the plains, on the coast up into the mountains. So
that's fascinating. You
got major, differences in size and colors, obviously, their names, everything about hummingbirds. I mean, I love our little hummingbird. We see it every year. Right. But anytime you travel, if you end up in places where there are more hummingbirds, you're just going to be amazed at the variation.
I love seeing them on my window. Like, first sight of spring is like, I've seen a hummingbird. So
May 9th. It always seems to be the day that we see our first, May 8th, May 9th, almost like clockwork. We see our first
I'm going to keep that date in my mind and see if I can match that. That's really cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really insightful. I never knew so much about a little bird.
Well, thank you for having me, Kate.
Thank you, everyone, for stopping by to listen to In Our Nature St. John today. Remember, we can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Nature St. John. Donations are accepted through the Canada Helps website. We host events every month, and they can be found listed on our website at stjohnnaturalistclub.org/events. Please follow and subscribe to our monthly podcast, and if you have any ideas for discussion, let us know in the comments. Until next time.